The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey folks, we're going to get started in just about 4 minutes or so here local time. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for coming in early and getting settled. Like I said, we're going to get going early. I see some familiar names in here. Thanks for coming today. If you don't mind using the question pane to let me know where you're dialing in from, I'd really appreciate it. Like to get some perspective on where folks are dialing in from. May end up helping us tailor these times differently moving forward. We've been sticking with the 11 a.m. Eastern time slot recently for at least the last 3 months consistently, and always open to hearing different time slots. 11 a.m. doesn't always work for everybody. As we continue to do these week after week, we continue to get feedback and make these webinars more relevant for folks and easier to attend. But as always, we do share the recordings for these. So again, folks, we're going to get started here in just about 2 minutes. So sit back and get comfortable, and we'll get going here shortly. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, folks. We're going to get started in here in just about a minute. Thanks for joining us early today. Getting settled in. If you don't mind using the question and answer pane to send me a note on where you're dialing in from today, I'd really appreciate it. I'd love to hear from all of you and where you're all from. Thanks for participating in that. See a lot of familiar names on here today. I know that our UK partners are on. Thanks, Open Reality, for joining us today. I see some folks from Net Peppers in Germany. Every week these guys continue to join. We love it. Our distribution partners are really active overseas, continue to support us and evangelize 7 Signal. Love it. Local folks, we got some Texas, we got some Pennsylvania, New York. Thanks, guys. California, welcome. Good to see you all logging in today and sharing your information. My name is Don Cook. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at 7 Signal. With me today is Mr. Kriss Minton. Kriss, welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. We're going to get into Chris's background, and he's going to lead us through our discussions today. We've got a really great topic, one that we ran a few months back and backed by popular demand, budgeting for wireless LAN improvements. And this is really a broad ecosystem with a general topic for a title. And we're going to get into all the nuts and bolts of that, and Kriss is going to lead us through that discussion. And, use the Q&A pane on your newly updated, I think, Citrix dashboard. Right, Kriss? There's some changes since the last time I was even on last week doing this. So if you get confused, I'm sure none of you will, but it's that orange arrow sticking out of the right-hand side of your screen. Just expand that window if it's not already expanded, and you can use the question tab to ask any questions throughout the webinar, and we'll get to them either as we go through or at the end, but we will get to them. So feel free to use that. And always, we will record today's presentation. We will share it with you. All you need to do is respond to one of my emails and just say, hey, Don, shoot me that recording when you get a chance, and I'll make sure that you get it. And if you do have any follow-up questions after the webinar is over, happy to answer those as well. So let's get on with the show. A little bit about 7Signal for those of you who are new to the group. And we, again, have these best practices webinars every week. So if you're new to the group and you're not familiar with 7Signal, just a little bit about us. We've hit some major milestones over the years. We're up to 4 million devices that we monitor daily. That doesn't include all the networks and access points and all the fun stuff that we monitor on a day-to-day basis. But we do crunch a lot of numbers, over 1 billion data points that we analyze daily. So that's through the KPIs for both Mobileye and SapphireEye, and we'll talk very briefly about those in a few minutes because this is not about a product pitch today. We've got over 200 customers around the world, 30 plus partners all over the place around the world. A lot of them are on today's call. Thanks for joining us, folks. Our product, our hardware product, is certified in over 40 countries. We are GDPR compliant, so we take data security very, very seriously, and privacy. So having that tag and logo to use for us is really, really important. We've got 12 patents, so the technology you see from 7Signal, you're only going to see from 7Signal. So that's something to keep in mind as those of you who are interested in looking for products and looking for troubleshooting products in particular, and you do end up on one of our product demos. Notice that you'll only see that kind of technology from us. So in a nutshell, 7Signal is here to enable the wireless world. And more specifically, we do that by finding and fixing Wi-Fi issues. So over the last 10 plus years in business at 7Signal, we've created a full outside-in enterprise framework. So we monitor the air, the endpoints, where no other manufacturer or troubleshooting software lives. Completely APN device agnostic, completely modular. So we like to say over here, if you've seen one wireless network, you've seen one wireless network. They're all unique. They all have different uses and purposes and use cases. So depending on what your needs are, what challenges you're running into, we'll create a solution that's a good fit for your environment. All of our products are complete with reporting and analytics and alerting, as you would expect. And what we're looking for are the top 7 Wi-Fi problems. Everything that has to do with Wi-Fi bubbles up to one of these 7 issues, whether it's congestion or coverage or interference of some kind, roaming issues, the adapters and driver combination, configurations, services, everything bubbles up to one of those. And how we find those is we're running active and passive tests on the devices and on the network, looking for things like packet loss, latency, and jitter, giving you a MOS score, running a spectrum analysis with packet capture, etc., to get to those problems so you can get to the root cause of your issues quickly. So I mentioned the outside-in framework. What's the difference between what's happening now, which we call the legacy way of troubleshooting? You're relying on your manufacturers to give you data on the network, which is great. They can look at things like applications and what's working, what's not, your top talkers, that sort of stuff, which is great information, but they don't have visibility into the end user. That's where 7Signal comes in. We live in the air. We live on those devices to help our engineers get to the root cause of issues quickly. No more finger pointing. Is it the network? Is it the device? Is it the wired network? We can pinpoint all of those issues quickly and go back in time so you can, when you do get a help desk call, while there'll be fewer of those since you'd be assessing your network proactively, when you do get that help desk call, you can go to that exact time on the network, on that device, and look and see what the issue was. You're able to replicate those problems that the user had, unlike any other software in the industry, which gives you that actionable insight into what you need specifically to get that problem fixed, if it's on the device, if it's on the network, if it's on the wireless LAN. We do that with two different modules to our solution. All software as a service, though the product on the right-hand side has a hardware component. That's our Sapphire Eye, and I'll start with that. It's our perfect client that sits on the network, either up in the rafters with the access points or down on a desk or wherever you end up mounting it. It is a subscription software service that comes with it. Got a full spectrum analyzer on it, and it looks for problems that we talked about earlier: network services, your wireless LAN configuration, radio frequency and co-channel interference, coverage, and congestion. While on the left is our product that lives on the device. It's a completely software as a service solution, runs in the background on Windows, Mac, and Android devices, 100% software based. And this is the solution you would need to look for adapter driver combinations, roaming issues, which is huge with our customer base, especially in hospitals and manufacturers, retailers, wholesalers, warehouses. The list goes on. Coverage and congestion issues, and certain types of interference as well. So the big difference between the two, again, Sapphire will be your services, your configuration, your spectrum analyzer for packet capture, that kind of stuff, and Mobileye would be for the device itself, adjacent and co-channel interference, roaming, adapters and drivers, etc. So big difference between the two. All finding great problems on the Wi-Fi network, just really, really cool stuff from Seven Signal. So not a product pitch, just an overview from us. Kris, I'm going to give you control so we can kind of walk through some wireless LAN budgeting stuff.
Okay, great.
So take it away.
Absolutely.
Why don't you give us a little background before you get started too? Sometimes we do that in the beginning. I kind of skipped over that, so maybe a good background at you would be a good place to start.
No worries, guys. I'm Kris Minton. I'm a solution engineer with Seven Signal. Pretty new to the team. Came in September. Had about 20 plus years now of experience in enterprise networking, which makes me one of the older guys now. Which is I'm not sure when that happened, but it did. Because I remember things differently than people that grew up before Google and the internet and what have you. And to think about what things were back then in late 90s to what we have now, it's impressive what all we've done as a group, as technologists. And even I always like to think that we're all a part of that. If you're in IT, you're a part of making connections and communications, and hats off to all of us. I think it's a great job. It's a great career, and I think we're doing for the common good, like the Star Trek mentality of it. So I've been in the business about 20 years. I started at my dad's PC shop for no pay, and then I went through college, and then went for my first pay at a hospital in Abilene, Texas. Then went to the big city of Dallas, in Chicago for Arthur Andersen or Andersen Consulting Accenture, and I spent about a decade there working on large corporate, global 500 state and local governments and federal accounts, building networks, monitoring networks, all that kind of stuff. And networking moved into security, moved into voice, moved into wireless, and even has moved into audio visual. So I worked at the Accenture, then I worked at the great state of Texas, where I ran a team for a data center that had about 20 billion in assets, and we held the personal information, the bank information, and the healthcare information of some state of Texas employees. So I was there for 3 years and did not sleep an inch.
I bet
it was very hard to protect all of that, because as you guys know, computers are an input-output device at the basic, and to have something secure like that kind of goes against what communications is. So then I decided I've had enough of the the real world experience, so I moved to sales. And I've worked with as a sales engineer for SonicWall, for Fortinet, for Airtight Networks, and now for Seven Signal. So I am very glad to be here, and I'm glad to talk to you guys and let you guys know about what I think are some pitfalls I've had in my 22 years of asking for money for Wi-Fi projects. So before we get started, I just want to make sure you guys can see my screen. Okay, it should be just a regular backboard. or
Yep,
background?
I've got your background.
Okay, sweet. So if there's one thing that I could say that I would like you guys to take away, there's a lot of information. This topic could go lots of different ways. The one thing I want to leave you guys with is that when it becomes with budgeting for a wireless LAN, the main takeaway is to try to stop thinking like an engineer right off the bat when somebody hands one of these into your lap. Either you wanted it or somebody came to you and said, hey, by the way, we need a new Wi-Fi project. The first thing after the shock or the excitement, depending on how things are, you want to, as an engineer, you want to go and start building things. You want to start just thinking about all the new technologies. You want to start doing all that. And my inference is to just take a breath and think of it from the customer side, your customers, the people that actually come to you, the what you provide your customers. You need to put yourself in their shoes, because Wi-Fi, out of all the other project that network engineers or desktop engineers, or if you have to do all, or if you're very segmented in a large company or your organization, wireless is very unique because it is an access layer medium. It is the connection between the endpoints and everything else. It has a lot of touch points. As you guys know, anybody's PC, anybody that has a wireless NIC, you're going to be offering that connectivity to them. Wi-Fi is, to the naked eye, obviously invisible. So it makes it very difficult to understand, especially from layman's people, from people that aren't into IT, but they're actually a part of your business, and that business is not IT. It's actually, say, making pharmaceuticals. They're really focused on their business, and they just want to have a smooth connectivity. If you get those guys involved, and this is the second thing I would like for you guys to walk away with. If you get those guys involved at the beginning, if you ask them what success looks like, and you keep them involved in the wireless project, not the day-to-day, you will have a successful wireless LAN transition. And what I mean by that is that when we start as a engineer on a project, like I said, Wi-Fi is an access medium, and it encompasses all things, even though it's at the access layer. So connectivity, once you start thinking about your new wireless project, you start thinking about the beginning, radio beacons, frames, all access points. You're going to start thinking about how do you get authentication to those devices for this new project. You're going to start thinking about even how those devices will then get connected to your services, IP and DNS services. So this is all running through your mind as soon as that paper hits your desk saying we have budget for a WLAN project, or we've just acquired a company, or we've got a new warehouse and we need to get connectivity to it. I know all of your minds just went right here, just to the engineering of it. What we want to focus on first is the quality, and the quality from your endpoint, your end users, your customers' perspective. This is what really matters and what's really successful, unless you go way over budget of what success criteria looks like. Having a person, and let's use an example of a hospital. Let's say a new wing is open. Having a point of contact person that's involved in the statement of work of what your Wi-Fi is actually going to provide, and having them test that as you guys go through, that is going to be extremely valuable to you guys, because they are going to be able to give feedback, and you're going to be able to see real-time connectivity as your test and as you bring this to light. So having them involved is really writing the statement of work right there for you when you come into a new wireless project. And so as that's stewing in your head, I want to switch gears here and ask kind of a fun question. Again, you can participate or not participate. If you guys have heard this before, don't ruin it. But every IT budget, there's across the board, and this is McKinsey, there's the number one line entry is the most expensive things that IT departments pay for. What's the second? Do you think it's employee salary, software licenses, like yearly software licenses, or hardware purchases? And I bet you guys would be surprised. So Don, what do you think?
I'll have to go with salaries.
That's very close because salaries is number one. Actually, the second highest employee is software subscriptions.
Oh,
So
okay.
software subscriptions are just almost at equal to salaries, and that's salaries plus benefits, if that puts that in perspective.
Yeah, it does.
So it is pretty amazing, and it's something, again, as an engineer. I've worked with a lot of people, and I used to think the same way. It's like, I don't care how much it costs. I don't care. I just want to work on the latest technology. But what I've found in my experience, I guess now I'm an old IT guy, is that budgets are finite, but projects aren't. So if you get a budget for a project, usually if you can get below a certain date or a certain amount, that budget then gets moved into something else. And so that's always a great thing with Wi-Fi. And I think Wi-Fi is always an exciting project because Wi-Fi is usually, when it comes to a new one, there's different types. The refresh is usually the one that's pretty simple. Hey, everything's dated. We need to do a refresh. We've known about this. We've hit end of life, into service, into support, all the EOXs that all the vendors have that you have to try to figure out if your device is into life, into support, or what have you. And you really have a choice. Do you go with your incumbent vendor, which is the people that you guys have worked with, or do you go with somebody else? That decision as a WLAN refresh, that takes you on a completely different path, as you guys know. And that is one of the things that you need to write down when you're talking about budgets or what kind of wireless project this is, especially when you are not thinking as an engineer, you're thinking as a business person. Why, ask like my kids do, why? Everything I say, they say, why? 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 I'm going to question everything, but very politely, not like my children do to me. And you'll say, what is the business purpose of this? What are we doing? An example, years ago, high school school district, they were going to do a Wi-Fi project for their stadium. Got handed to a VAR and to a manufacturer I was working with, and we all got super excited because we automatically assumed, and here it is, right, the assumption that we're going to build Wi-Fi for all the people going to the games. And so we already started thinking about outdoor. We started thinking about coverage. We started thinking about all sorts of stuff, and the cost, just as you thought, starts to get more and more in our heads. One of the junior engineers asked the question, "What's the purpose of it?" And one of the guys on our team was like, "That's a ridiculous question. It's to provide Wi-Fi." And the superintendent actually said, "No, that's a great question. It's actually not to provide Wi-Fi for family and friends and everybody that comes to the game. We're not blanketing Wi-Fi, but the high school coaches have a new software program that everybody uses now. Several years ago, it was new, and they want to be able to access it in real time, and we want to be able to offer it to visitors as well." Right there, just asking that business question of why completely changed the direction of the scope of the project, and it was successful, and it was way under budget because someone asked the question, what's the business need? So again, asking the business need and then categorizing it as, is it a group refresh, or is it an expansion, or is it a rip and replace? A rip and replace is usually tied closely to a WLAN refresh when you go with a different WLAN vendor. When you've decided that the vendor of your choosing, or somebody else is choosing at that time, no longer meets the needs, or there's a price, or many of the options. Wi-Fi is one of those things that people rip and replace. I worked with a startup that we were working on open Wi-Fi for a while, where you could actually flash with Ani. The idea was to flash every AP, and then you could install any software you wanted, Cisco, Juniper, you name it. And it was a great idea. It didn't come to fruition yet. But as you guys know, if you're going to Wi-Fi, you got to rip and replace. And rip and replace sometimes goes hand in hand depending on which vendor you go with. But expansions are really, I think, the ones I really want to focus on this conversation, because with expansions, you get to really help your customers. And again, think of a wing in the office, a wing in the location, and it's all about return on investment. So if you know of an expansion, you can then start to go outside your comfort zone, and you can even use things like your non-typical vendor in your organization. This is a great opportunity because usually expansions, or say like an area, a hard to get to spot, we might have a little bit of budget, it might be something quick. You can simply go and literally this simple, go and get a free access point from another vendor by attending a session, and you can actually learn, have your team train, and you can actually test that out with an expansion, as long as you have your business people that are in charge of the customers that are in that area, and you guys are talking and saying, how are things looking, how are things going, and they're actually testing as you move on to that. And we'll talk about the actual pilot, the 10% rule, which I like to go with. You can actually learn a new technology and save a lot of money, and then sometimes actually even be ahead of the game when it comes to new technology, right? But again, these questions are all business focused to what is the goal. Very important when it comes to access layer type projects, right? Usually an expansion, anytime Wi-Fi has been modified or is changing, besides a complete rip and refresh, your business, your organization, your company, your entity is going through some type of change. And it's always great to be in front of it and to be talking with your customers and having them involved with it, right? So now, because I'm already starting to get a little low on time, I want to talk about with design phase. So at this point, when you're budgeting for WLAN, you're stop thinking like an engineer. You've asked the questions of what's the goal, what does good look like, right? What does good look like? You've asked yourself, what type of WLAN refresh is this? Is this a rip and replace? Is this a complete just a refresh? Is this an expansion? You've got those questions answered, and now you have your people that you want to be in the test identified. They've already given you input. The greatest next thing to do is in the design phase is to say, hey, we've already talked about what we've got. You almost have almost all of the statement of work and the proof of concept already written, because you've already answered these questions, and you have the time frame, and by this time you've had the budgets already understood. One of the biggest mistakes that I've made in my career, and I've seen others, and I'm not going to say if you guys have done as well, is to get a project and immediately say, well, how much is my budget? Or have somebody tell me what my budget is before you even know what the purpose is of that WLAN project. I mean, go back to the stadium. I mean, if that one guy hadn't asked, well, what's the purpose of this? We were going to be bringing in trucks. We were going to be bringing in bulldozers. We were going to have we were going to basically make everybody just glow in the dark, because we're going to have Wi-Fi just pumping through the whole stadium. Obviously, that money would have been completely blown out of the water, because they would be like, no, this is not what we need. You get the time frame and you get the budget that you're needed. And now you have this information. In the install phase, you've already done a pilot. So at this point, you have already been in communications with the decision makers and with the testers, and you should have at least a 10% of whatever the whole is of what you're doing already up and running and connected to your network and being piloted by people that are actually doing the work. And this is not in your lab. This is not, well, I was able to get an IP address in the lab, so now I can sign off that Wi-Fi works, right? That is definition Wi-Fi connectivity. That is by definition, you've connected Wi-Fi, but that is not what the quality is and what the customer expects. And so it's actually a fail. And the only way to test that, with you guys know, with Wi-Fi, again, Wi-Fi is one of these crazy mediums that it's also very dependent on the actual devices. I mean, we can look here and see, as this guy, that each device runs at different data rates. And we'll notice lots of different PCs have completely different results. And that's really unique to Wi-Fi. That's really unique to endpoints and laptops, because we have network interface cards that have different types of adapters, different types of drivers. And the operating system of these devices, they actually pull a lot of shots on how I'm going to get connected, right? So there's a lot of that to consider. And to solve that is to do a live proof of concept and pilots. And I suggest 10% in the area. of people using their applications and to get live monitoring traffic of that. Have those people report back to you and monitor it and say, if it's a hospital application, say, hey, I'm in the new wing. I've got my standard issued WAL. I've connected to this new access point, and I didn't even know that I was connected. Everything's running fine. When nobody complains, that's usually when it's the best, right? That's when you're like, wow, that's total success. Having that information, having that feedback at the wrap of your POC, of your proof of concept with your 10%, you'll already have the entire rollout plan done. Mm-hmm. Right.
And you know what? Before you flip to that next slide, Kris, maybe you could talk a little bit about having the conversation with other departments. So you mentioned devices there. So we're talking budgeting for wireless LAN today and improvements to the LAN, and often. I shouldn't say often. In some cases, it's not the LAN at all. So, or the wireless LAN at all. And maybe our engineers are nodding their heads in their offices right now. Yeah, it's how do I? It's not the wireless LAN. It's the device, and the finger pointing goes back and forth, and sometimes those conversations can be hostile between those two. Departments, how do you have that conversation with them saying, hey, there are solutions out there. We need to work together. We got a budget. Some advice there might be some helpful for this group.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure that's never happened.
Right.
Terrible joke. Yeah. I've even been in environments where in the same room and you couldn't even talk to the other team because everybody was so angry with each other. And everybody would literally sit separate from each other. And even on outings, the network team would be away from the security team. Security team would be away from the voice team, and the storage guys wouldn't even be there because they were always busy and they couldn't stand anybody. So it gets like that because there's a lot on you. I mean, you got to take your hat off. I mean, there's a lot of work. There's a lot of stuff to keep up with, and it's very hard to keep connectivity up. And wireless access, because of that medium, because every device is connected to it, Don, it's just exactly like you said. It involves everybody, and depending on where you're at in the rollout. I mean, some things aren't, it's never perfect. It doesn't work in a vacuum. Sometimes you come to a project late. That's usually the hardest thing to do is after the fact, if another team wasn't involved. And teams can have frictions. And as you guys have some of the larger corporations, you have a desktop team and you have a network and you've got a security and you've got a project management team. You've got a SharePoint team. You've even got a Q&A dev test team, and there's all these processes being written on how new things come in, and they're supposed to be, especially in the state and federal, very stringent policies on how things go and the timeline, and it can get really difficult to actually make change. But getting your peers on the same goal that you are, which is to provide connectivity, that's what we are. We are like this is cheesy, we're the enlightened ones that give connectivity to basically the world, right? We connect, resources, data, and what people do with it is what people do with it. But getting those teams together and going to a desktop team and saying, look, I've got a Wi-Fi project and I'm a network engineer, but it is so dependent on laptops and endpoints and workstations and all of these devices you use, that as soon as that came out of your mouth, I'm sure that desktop guy already started rolling his eyes. He's like, this guy's going to want me to go to every single desktop and push the software update, or he's going to want me. He's going to put this right in my lap. And you just, in my experience, is saying, hey, I want your input on this. We can make this really good. It's all about the customer. And Don, I think this is the biggest thing about that, is that you keep the focus on the customer experience. You don't keep the focus on what it makes easier for the network team or the Wi-Fi team or the support team. It's let's focus on giving our customer, our end users, the best connectivity experience they have, and be seamless and basically be invisible. To where they don't have to do a lot because they are focused on their work that they're trying to do for the company and for you guys, right? So getting all of those guys together and having conversations saying, I want you to be a part of it. I want your input. And the goal is here. and keep focusing on the goal and who the customer is and who you're really trying to solve the problem for, if you get in front of that like that, it usually goes a lot smoother. And also, the project doesn't stop when all of a sudden you're in the middle of it and they say, the vendor's like, oh, we got to push out a software update to, all your devices. Well, how many devices do you have? 5,000. Okay, well, we can't do anything until that gets done. And they start asking you all these questions that's not your cup of tea. That's not what you're hired for. That's another team, and they're not even involved. And then of course you walk over there and like, hey, Kriss, hey Don, can you push an update to 5,000 devices tomorrow? Right? That's not where you want to be. And if you've got that person in that room, they get excited because they're IT guys too, and they're like, wow, this is a chance I get to use some technology, or maybe I had budget for something to do that, but I got stricken down, and now we have a need for it, right? And so all of a sudden you're looking at budget and you guys are working collectively. Don, to me that's usually the best way to do that.
That makes a lot of sense. Thanks.
So much easier said than done, but at least
right.
at least you start off by offering the idea of someone to help with. Mm-hmm. So in a nutshell, again, that's what it is. I want you guys to think like engineers always, but when you get a Wi-Fi project, or maybe try to move this into any other project, just stop for a second and say, what does this mean from a business person? What's actually happening? Who am I trying to? What goals am I trying to accomplish? And then move from there. And then I wanted to show you guys at the end some fun stuff. So everybody's busy, and that's kind of laughable to say that. You've got more projects and time. You've got more work. You got to keep the lights on. You've got updates. You've got projects also. It's very hard to attend webinars like this, and it's hard to attend others, but they are out there. And over lunch, we offer one that we do over lunch as well, online, and others do as well. But this is a great way to learn about a new technology that you're going to be tested on in the future, or learn about how a vendor does something the other way, and it doesn't cost you anything. So I found a lot of luck by having a lot of these projects. Some of these, especially the refresh, or maybe like a little a pop-up Wi-Fi that's needed maybe 2-3 times a year, is to actually go to some of these seminars for our vendors that I don't use and learn about their technology and get a free access point and get a year's of service. And now I become more technical to another technology or another vendor. I'm learning some new features, and it helps me with my incumbent, because I can say, hey, I just installed the Mist so-and-so. Why, when is this coming? Or you can say, hey, let's use this. And sometimes, and just sometimes, you can use this off campus or off books. And what I mean by that is that you don't have to go through the ordering. You don't have to go through all the standard procedures. You can say, I've got a WLAN project, and it turns out to be just a quick add-on. Let's say the gym, and people want to have access for that. So I've got this X vendor's AP that I got from a webinar. I'll go talk to my security guys. I'll go talk to my management. I'll talk to everybody like we talked about, and I already know how to use it. I'll just pop it up, and we'll just connect it to the DMZ, and everybody there can just get raw internet access, and nothing else. And there it is. And then all of a sudden, you're the big hero. Another great thing to do is you get to go to the conferences and trade shows, talk to some of these vendors, because a lot of times these vendors will even self-fund something. Well, I need 25 access points to do that. I've been in a situation where the vendor says, hey, we're new. If we could do a case study with you, we'll seed you $50,000 worth of equipment. And you're like, are you kidding me? And like, no, you get it all approved. You make sure that there's nothing at the end of the day where it says you owe $3 million. You go and you do it, and you're able to go off budget with that. Didn't cost you a dime. Learned a new technology, became the hero, right? And learned a new technology right there. So those are some tips I've learned over the years to help out with that, and I just wanted to leave you guys with that.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Kriss. Well done, as always. At this point, we will open it up to questions. If you've got any questions, go ahead and use the questions pane drop down in the GoToMeeting control panel, and we'll get those answered. There are some in here. The reason I asked that device question was one of the questions that came through on that question pane. There's also some more around getting a copy of the presentation, and we will certainly do that as well. All you need to do is email me, reply to one of my emails, whatever works best for you. This is Don, of course, and we'll get that over to you. Kris, how does Wi-Fi 6 change the game, and what's the timing like for improving your WLAN and making it AX compatible?
That's a great question, and we get that asked a lot. The main thing is interoperability, to make sure that whatever devices you're using or planning on using, and desktops, laptops, business class usually have an 18-month life cycle. Routers, firewalls, 4 to 7 years, right? Depending. Wi-Fi, sometimes 4 to 7 years. This new Wi-Fi 6 is new hardware. And that obviously sometimes is a bummer, because with software, you're a flash update and you're good to go. But Wi-Fi 6 is actually a hardware, and it's hardware not only on the access points, but it's also on the NICs, the network interface cards. So you don't have to prepare for Wi-Fi 6 overnight, and you don't have to do a cutoff. But you need to keep involved, and you need to listen to what the community and what your peers are doing. If you guys remember at CES, 5 gig last year, or 5G, was a huge draw. Like, everything was going to be 5G, and CES passed, and everybody was like, what's up with 5G, right? So you don't want to spend a lot of money on a technology that's relevant or new, or not, or hasn't hit relevance yet. But what you want to do is talk about how you can add all of that together. And it would be really interesting with a WLAN project, if it got right to the crux of that technology starting to hit mainstream, is to talk to the desktop team, talk to the Wi-Fi, talk to the network. Hey guys, we have an opportunity to do a refresh and not do a rip and replace. But we could also use this, and we could scope creep and say, hey, let's test Wi-Fi 6 capabilities, right? So those are a couple of my thoughts. Sign up to the forums, keep involved, and keep involved with your competitors, of what your competitors are actually doing.
Yeah, that's good. Good feedback. Thanks. Well, we've got time for one more question. We'll take this next one in here from Colin. Let's see. What happens when the what happens when the budget does not meet the goals required? How to approach it, and what gives?
Mm-hmm. So that happens. I've happened to me. And what you do is usually start to look at what was said to be delivered in the statement of work. And with a budget and a statement of work at the beginning, you usually can hit it. If you've come in late, or if something is behind the gun, or if somebody says, hey, we've only got $25,000 in 2 months, before you start trying to try to fill up the $25,000 budget, go and say, what does this thing need to accomplish, and write out the very specific goals. And if it starts to get where the budget is not going to make it, or if you've already spent the budget, you can then go to the decision makers and the check writers and sit there and say, hey, we had budget to do this. It was going to accomplish these 4 objectives. We no longer have the budget, or we've gone over. Which one of these do we need to cut? And which ones can you live without? And if they can't live without, then help us get some money, right? HR's got a budget, marketing's got a budget, right? Those decisions get pushed on. But just simply saying, if you start with a project and you start with a budget with a number already in mind, and you start engineering it for something that you're just thinking, and you don't involve the decision makers, and you don't involve the people that are testing, and you don't have a statement of work or a small pilot, those issues come up more often than not.
Thank you, Kris. One note here from from Riza, a question about Mobileye being used for multiple customers to help them troubleshoot Wi-Fi. In a nutshell, the Mobileye licenses are not connected to an individual customer, so they can be assigned to different networks. So if you're trying to get a sampling or crowdsource a Wi-Fi on multiple different customers, you can certainly do that. Happy to answer any questions you've got around that. Don't want to talk too much about products on this today, but if you are interested in products, and you want to go to a product tour, we have them every Friday at noon. There's no marketing spin, no PowerPoint slides, just product tour. Go to go.7signal.com/tour. Take a look. We can get you in the POC process after that if you want some free gear to trial out in your environments. That's the logical first step. So go ahead and check that out if you're interested. If not, we will see you all next week. We've got another great topic for you all next week, and you'll get an email from me on that. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much, Kris. Well done.
Thank you guys for your time. Y'all have a great day.